Next presentation will be provided by Professor Kang-sik of Korea Maritime and Ocean University. He will make a presentation on the story of the drifting through Busan, Hokkaido, and Tushima. Please, you have 20 minutes for your presentation. I am Kang-sik from Busan Maritime and Ocean University. Today, it is such a pleasure for me to make a presentation about Lee Ji-hang's Pyojurok. In the pre-modern era, the drifting was very dangerous, and it happened a lot because the size of vessel was quite small, and most of them in the vessel died. But some of them survived and drifted to some areas and back to their hometown safely. So they were very lucky people. So it is very few who wrote a journal about their drifting story. So today I'll make a presentation about by using the Lee Ji-hang's Pyojurok, who drifted from Busan-Hokkaido to Tushima. So you only gave me 20 minutes. But according to my resume, I made a presentation for just 20 minutes. Lee Ji-hang, it is also recorded as Isandal, and his ancestors lived in the Yeongcheon in Gyeongsang-buk-do province and moved into the Dongdaebu in Busan. And he, in 1647, he was born, the 25th year of King Injo's reign, and in 1675, he passed the state examination and passed. Then he joined the Suocheong, which is the department to guard the Naman-sansang, but his father died. Then he back to his hometown in Busan. So this book is a list of people who passed the test, the military to join the military service. And here we can see the name Lee Ji-hang, who is born in Yeongcheon and lived in Dongdae in Busan. But through the online, we can check the record about Lee Ji-hang. That some article said Lee Ji-hang was born in 1756, but it should be corrected, I think. And there are several kinds of Lee Ji-hang's Pyojurok, but this one is saved in the National Central Library. Then there are two types of Lee Ji-hang's Pyojurok, and within that document we can see some lines, and those are the name of people who drifted with Lee Ji-hang. And when I tracked the data about Lee Ji-hang, I found this at Hokkaido City Hall. In Hokkaido City Hall, they published in 1936 about the new history of Hokkaido, and in volume 5, it collected the history about Hokkaido, and here we can see the data of the information about Lee Ji-hang's Pyojurok. The people in Hokkaido investigated the Lee Ji-hang and their party. So through this document, I think that we thoroughly knew what the Lee Ji-hang's situation back then. So in 1696, Lee Ji-hang stayed in Busan, his back hometown, but he had to work in Wonju, Gangwon-do province. So he needed to back to the Wonju, but it took so long if he go to in inland. So instead, he choose to take a ship, like a ship selling fish. So he paid and aboard. And after he was on board, so there are other companies who want to go to the Wonju, and there are some sailors who sell the fishes. So we saw the name Gongcheol, residents of Busan, also took the ship together. The reason of drift was, so most of the drift was caused by usually caused by some strong winds in the sea near the Korea. So most records about the drift said that those drift occurred due to the wind near the Korean coastal area. So when they left Busan and moved to the Yeongdo, currently it's a Busan, but it's a kind of Gyeongsangnam-do province. Anyway, they had a very strong wind near the Ulsan area and were drifted. How about the deep sea? When they moved into the deep sea, the current could be the main reason for the drift. There is a crucial current existed in this route, and they were drifted by the Tema current and moved to the side of East Sea and got affected by the Riemann current. And maybe you can see the picture later, but so this because of those two currents, they were drifted to the Hokkaido. So this is the picture of the current. This is the newest. Current flows in Northeast Asian seas. The red one is the crucial current. The main current went down to Japan, but now it also passed to the Tsushima Strait between Korea and Japan, and moved to the north side of Japan. And Yeonheju current also goes down to the Japan and Korea side, and there is some circulations. So it is possible to drift it to the north of the Hokkaido. So I think it was possible to drift it to these areas. And back then, there was a list of who were on board. It is quite rare because it is not easy to leave some records about who was on board, because to make a record, people who know the Chinese character should on board. So except for Lee Ji-hyang, there were 8 people, 4 from Ulsan, and the master of the ship is Kim Ki-dong, and the rower was on board. So all combined, 8 people was on board. So how they arrived into the north side of Hokkaido? So in 1696, April 13th, they left Busan. But they are kind of sailors, so it took some time. Anyway, in April 28th, they were drifted. So, and they moved to the north of the Hokkaido, the Mishido, at May 11th. And there they asked help to the Aborigines for food. And they moved down to the mainland of Japan, mainland of Japan. And there they arrived at Smaebu. And since then, they met Japan, and they get well served by the Japanese people. Back then, the people in Joseon were drifted to Japan, mainly drifted to Japan, but normally to the Kyushu area. From Nagasaki, Tsushima, so they back to from Nagasaki to Tsushima to Korea, or sometimes Tsushima to Korea, to Joseon. After the Japanese invasion to Korea, they've been to the Osaka, and the Tsushima to Busan is the main route. So in 1897, 1 year later, January 14th, they back. So it took about 1 year, 11 months. It took back to their hometown. This is when they drifted from Ulsan and they moved to the Hokkaido, as I explained before. Due to the current, they went to the north of the Hokkaido and down to the Japan, and they were saved from the aborigines and moved to the Osaka and Tsushima and back to Busan. When those drifters arrived, then the destination country always investigated them thoroughly. So they were investigated in Masayamagu, and they left. They were there. All the belongings and goods were investigated by the Japan, and most of them are for belongings are for regular use and clothes. And Ijihang held so many books. So this is a process when they were drifted. At the end of Joseon era, the relationship between China, Korea, and Japan, we actually kind of served to China. And after the United regime started in Japan, they tried to get rid of this kind of relationship. But anyway, still the relationship between Joseon and Japan, after the Japan's invasion to Japan, it was a kind of friendly relationship. So the process for the drifters in Japan and the investigation was conducted in a kindly manner. So after those friendly investigation, those drifters moved to the Edo, and all those processes were written in detail. And all the drifters when they arrived in Japan, they exchanged some products, what they need. So for them, they also received some products which was needed for survive. So for Ijihang and two other people on board, they received some different items because of the social level. But the most difficult thing is the communication, because they wanted to introduce themselves from and where they're from, but the language, because of the language gap, they couldn't communicate thoroughly. Still, we couldn't. We used some body language to communicate in any way. So when they arrived in Hokkaido, Ejo area, before that it was not belong to Japan. So the Japanese was not used there. So when they arrived in Hokkaido, some people came and talked, but no one couldn't understand. On the second process in Matsuyama, when they arrived in the Japanese area, they can communicate in Japanese. Because in Busan, there was an area where Japanese people lived, so people who live there can speak in Japanese. So one of them in Kim Deok-sun could speak in Japanese, so they could easily communicate in the Japan. However, in the Hokkaido area, they had some difficulties in communication. So Lee Ji-young also left some record about those difficulties in communication. In Matsumai, he left a record by only relying on the sounds of those Aborigines. And here's Akira. In Chinese words, wagara, which means water. Here's Abi. In Chinese character is Abi, but it sounds like ape, but it means a fire. So they learned some basic words and tried to communicate with the people, the Aborigines in Hokkaido, and moved down to the Japan. And in the Hokkaido, Lee Ji-young couldn't communicate, but when he arrived in Matsuyama, he could communicate with the people in Japan. So they spoke to the officials dispatched to Matsuyama. There was gold miners. So with the people who were responsible for the gold miner and the public officials and merchants, Lee Ji-young had an opportunity to talk with them. In Hokkaido, the leather were mainly produced. So there was a merchants who visit there to trade the leathers. And there were some monks in Japan. They also knew Chinese characters, so it was possible to communicate with them. And whenever we are in a difficult situation, we always tried to exchange what we had to survive. So through this kind of exchange, they received various products from Ejo, so to survive, and also they trade with some clothes like a leather to protect themselves. So various kinds of trade was conducted in Hokkaido. So when they experienced a drift in the Northeast Asian region, many people live there, believe the god of sea, so they prayed to the god of sea to save them. And many Eastern people predict their future based on the book, whether they will survive or not. And East Asian region, people in Korea and in China and Japan believed Buddha. So those religion was widely spread. So people prayed to their God what they believed. And Lee Ji-young also left a record about the environment, customs, and what they wear in Hokkaido. There are very few Joseon people who visit Hokkaido. So Hokkaido is quite near to Russia actually. So they are very tall and very hairy. So the Lee Ji-young left all those unique conditions and situations of Hokkaido in detail. And in Hokkaido is quite a northern area, which means that the snow did not melt down in May. So the meaning of the 이지항서 표주록 is that it is a record of hands-on experience about the northeast side of Japan, which were not developed back then. So few people know about the information about those areas, but through these 표주록 written by Lee Ji-hyang, we can see the cultures and customs of the Hokkaido back then. And as I mentioned before, the drift is not just end as a drift itself. Drift is related to the coming back to their hometown. So the relation between two countries is really important. So we can see that after the Japan's invasion to Korea, the relationship between two countries became amicable and friendly. So the wrecked ship, the Lee Ji-hyang asked to bring their wrecked ship to Joseon. So Ejo people sent those wrecked ship to Joseon. It also showed that how amicable they were. And I am a professor of Korea's Maritime and Ocean University. The reason why we focus on the Pyojurok is the route, sea route. The navigation of sometimes we can go back. So in the past, we need to follow the current. So this is a matter of navigation, a matter of route. So in deciding the route, the current is very important. So drifting itself is an accident, but the route which was found through the drift was a good information to find a new route. So the area where the drift actually occurred is a good point to find a good route or a good way to find a good how to navigate. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.